Didn't the other kids tell you not to come here? Go back before it's too late!
At the heart of horror, there has always been more than spooks and scares.
Sometimes, it's not what you see, but what you hear.
Welcome to Sound Scary.
Each week, we talk to the artists,
The musicians,
the fans, the people who haunt the shadowy corners of your mind.
join us as we delve into the deepest
Darkest.
and most unforgettable earscapes.
Welcome
To Sound Scary.
Welcome to another episode of Sound Scary Quarantine Edition. I am your host, Ryan Coltrera.
And I am James Oster, and today I'm really excited about our guest because it's someone I've respected for a while, a great filmmaker who is a little unusual, and I love his movies. Like, literally every movie he's made I like, which is rare. Todd, thank you for joining us today. This is amazing. We're like... It's weird. We're both watching Final Girls this weekend. And I just, as a lover of Friday the 13th, how did you get involved with that? Let's start with that.
Well, I love Final Girls, obviously. That's, I put my whole heart and soul into it, and everyone that worked on it did. And I think you can tell in the movie, and it has this kind of cult, people that have seen it really love it. And I think it's because you can feel that everyone that made it, it was like a cult of people made it, And I got involved because I had gone to college with Mark Fortin, who is one of the writers. And he was a bit older than me. And he and Josh Miller wrote the script. And I was friends with them. And so I came out of school and moved to Los Angeles. And the three of us would hang out and try to figure out ideas to write or things to do together, and just talk about movies that we loved. These guys were cinephiles, and Josh Miller's father was Jason Miller, who was a great actor and the priest in The Exorcist, and Jason Miller passed away, and so Josh and I shared this life experience of losing a father that we were very, very close to. And that was what we would hang and talk about. And one day I remember I was really chasing movies and trying to make movies, and Mark pitched this idea, very small little idea of, a kid gets stuck in like a bad 80s horror movie and has to survive their way out of it. Some version of that, and it would be kind of meta, and I was like, that's an amazing idea. I grew up in New York and watching, next to a video store, and watched all of those movies. I was a nut for all movies, but I loved horror movies. And I was like, that's a great idea. And then I didn't hear about it again for like a year or two. It just kind of went away, and that was it. And I went off and I made my first film. And my father passed away just a few months before I made that movie. So he just missed me, reaching this goal and having a dream come true, honestly. And he was a really supportive guy. So it was a really intense rupture in my life. And as I was editing that first movie, I had like a crisis and I was melting down. And Mark and Josh sent me the first draft, or a draft, of Final Girls. And I read it and I fell in love with it. Like, I became obsessed with it. Because it did a lot of things that I loved. It was a meta, it was a meta movie. It was like postmodern meta movie a little bit. And it was about movies, and I loved movies. But particularly, it was about a child who gets a second chance to be with a parent that they lost in a dream. And I was dreaming about my dad like every night in this time. And I really deeply connected to it and was like, this is a genius idea for a movie, to tell a story of, saving a parent, seeing a parent in the middle of a world that's trying to take them away all over again. How can I get involved? And so I got in there, and we worked on the script for a year or two, and then finding the money. And it was a really tumultuous process to get everything together, but that was sort of my way into that movie.
And you can definitely tell that there's a very big personal touch to that movie. There's so much heart and so much love between these characters. It really shines on screen.
I mean, if you ask Josh what the movie is to him when they were writing it, and we did a ton of work on the script, afterwards and together to, add comedy and make the meta stuff, more, all this. But the nugget of the movie is that stuff. And if you ask Josh, Josh would say that, the only way that he could re-experience his father as an adult was to watch him die over and over in The Exorcist, which was a really crazy way to be able to revisit, a person who you wanted to know more and more about. And so all of those things go through the movie, and, the first half of that movie is so fun and funny and clever and a love letter and all this stuff. But that's the last third of the movie, I think, is what all of us always knew we were trying to make work. That was what was really important and beautiful to us.
Now with us, our show is a lot about kind of the sound of horror and how it resonates throughout these films. One of the ongoing audio cues in your film is the use of Betty Davis eyes. Was there any sort of significance to choosing that as kind of the song between the mother and the daughter?
That's, it was scripted to be a different song. It was scripted originally to be 99 Luftballons. And it was always going to be like a dance macabre, at the end. That the mother was going to have to do a classic striptease in order to save the daughter, to martyr herself by doing, one of these kind of misogynistic tropes in order to save the child, which just was such a great a really complex idea. You know what I mean? Like, to use the shallow to do the deep. And anyways, we couldn't get Luftballons. It was too expensive. And then we had to go finding another song, and that was on me. And there were a bunch, there were Cyndi Lauper songs. We wanted to find a deep cut that resonated, that was mysterious and was, a female vocalist. And, but yeah, poppy, but mysterious, and beautiful, but fun. Those were kind of the touchstones. And Betty Davis Eyes is a song that I loved, and it came, I don't know, I think maybe it was just in my playlist or something, but that one started to really become like an earworm, and it hit all of the right notes. It's everyone knows it, but it's not like overplayed, and that it's about an actor, it's about an actress, and Malin Ackerman plays an actress in the movie, that it all seemed to make a tremendous amount of sense. Even the lyrics kind of make some sense, and so that's the one that we got. And yeah, to me, that's the most successful part of that movie are those moments, that song and that dance at the end. Yeah.
It's a wonderful moment, and I've got to give credit to Malin for, look, you see horror all the time, and you see good performances, and you see people who are terrified and scared, but my God, her performance in that is so emotionally it's heart-wrenching, and it's beautiful to watch, and I'm not afraid to say, Todd, that scene just brings tears to my eyes. Your films make me cry.
Well, that's intentional. I mean, that's the idea, it's cathartic to cry. And for me, I love movies, and I've always wanted to be a filmmaker. And I love them because even as like an anxious kid, or as an anxious, there's something so grounding about touching down into your emotions. So much of the anxiety comes from suppressing your feelings, or having all of those feelings muted inside of you. A movie can, like a magnet, just release them. And so for me, you see a movie and you're laughing and you're crying and you're scared. Just running through the gambit of feelings is like an emotional workout that hopefully you can feel a bit cathartic at the end of it. Those are the movies that I love the most. And so often the comedy, the laughing for a half or even more, is almost just a strategy to disarm the audience so that the feeling and the emotions really will be much more close to the surface at the end of the movie. So yeah, landing like that moment, like, are they going to cry? Like, if people are crying in the audience, you know that it's successful, you know? And
Sure.
and that's pretty true for all the stuff that I've made, including the new one.
Yeah, I was just watching Isn't It Romantic? And I know we're Sound Scare. We don't usually talk a lot about romantic comedies, but what you do is something that I don't think a lot of filmmakers do. You go meta, but it doesn't feel skin deep. There's a deep dive into each of these stories that you tell, where you kind of play with this, you know, whether it's a comedy or a horror film, you kind of play with the ideas behind that. And Isn't Romantic is such a smart, beautiful film. Again, really interesting. How did that film come about, and why Rebel Wilson?
I mean, with Romantic, that movie came to me. It was the same studio as my first movie, and Rebel was already involved. And, you know, if you watch Final Girls and Romantic, you certainly can see similarities. You know, someone gets stuck in the world of a movie, and the tropes and visual cues of the movie become an antagonist, and, you know, you got to kind of get it. So, I mean, there's, in a macro way, they're similar in subgenre, I guess you could say. But I always wanted to make a romance, you know? And I loved the idea of shooting in New York. I thought Rebel was hilarious. And, you know, there's something about... I hate the word parody, and I hate the word spoof. And even though I love Naked Gun and everything, but that's not, for me, what I ever think I'm doing. There's a thing of, like, that with cliches and, you know, cliches and tropes and familiar things in movies, people like think that those cliches are emotional. Like that scene at the end when the character gives the speech, or, you know, they fall in love, or like, you know how movies work, and you know how stories are told. And there's almost, it's like, it's refined and refined and refined until you can basically just tell the movie yourself. But people think that those things are, like, emotional or necessary. And for me, they always feel shallow and stiff and familiar and thin. And so I always think that as the storyteller, if you can take those things and say to an audience, hey, this thing is stupid, or hey, this thing's familiar, you know, the stupid thing, you know, that you're retethering yourself to the audience. You're saying, I know this fucking stupid structure that we've all gotten used to over the last 35 years. I got it. We're on the same page. Now I can use those things to just stay close to an audience, or to get in their heart, or to surprise them at the end with something that's actually soulful. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
And that was the idea with Romantic, is to talk about, you know, and as sophisticated as you can get when, you know, you have a bunch of producers telling you what to do. But are the romantic stories that we tell ourselves helpful or hurtful? Do they make you feel more isolated or more connected? Are they good or are they bad? You know, the romantic narratives that we constantly repeat to ourselves, that another person is going to complete us, and, you know, all this stuff. You know, I'm sure that everyone, men and women, both experience the short end of the stick from some of those stories. You gotta look a certain way, and you gotta be charming in a certain way, or, you know, and if someone doesn't look at you like this, it means they don't like you enough. It's like a setup for misery. And that seemed like that could be an actually productive and helpful thing to put in the center of a fun, you know, bubblegum pop movie, just like with Final Girls, some subterfuge, you know.
For sure.
Yeah. And then the thing about Final Girls, I'll also say, you know, some of those moments at the end of the emotional things work so well, also because of those wonderful actors. You know, Thaisa was primarily a dramatic actress and brings a real grounding to a movie that is so ridiculous. And Malin, in particular, who plays the mom, had just become a mom. Like, she had just given birth a few months before this movie, and was going through a whole new life experience, and had never really played a mom before. So she was bringing a lot of her, you know, personal life into that movie, and also using the character as a place to have some sort of a catharsis, or to work out what was going on in her own personal life. And so those things aren't like actors mimicking or aping or like kind of like getting through the emotional stuff so they can get to the comedy. It was the inverse of that, actually.
I mean, the whole thing was ridiculously well cast. Like, everyone is on point with their characters, and even like you mentioned the comedic beats, like I feel like the people you brought in to play those roles were perfectly selected. I feel like partially for their improv skills. Like, how much did you kind of let them go off the rails and kind of improvise their way through scenes for the comedic beats?
Yeah, a ton. I mean, it's always exciting. You know, when I was trying to get the money and get the whole thing together, the questions about tone were like the number one quote. What's the tone? What's the tone? Because like a horror comedy is a really, you know, probably only Edgar Wright, you know, and Shaun of the Dead. Like, only those movies would be considered like success stories for a very challenging genre to market, regardless of how good the movie is. So it always seemed really helpful to have the tone almost be there right in the casting. So you're going to have someone that's a dramatic actor like Thaisa, you know, but you're also going to have people that are really known for their sort of wild comedy, like Thomas Middleditch and Divine. But the movie's also, it's not going to be like, you know, spooky, scary movie or something, right? Because Ollie is going to be in it, you know, and that's you know, she's indie and very cool and a lot of great taste and, you know, really refined choices. So you know, it's going to be, you know, not just like kind of, you know, tacky or something. And then Malin kind of splits the bill a little bit because she's known for her comedy, but she also is known for, you know, action and all this stuff. And it's also going to be, you know, and then also hopefully you can get like, it's going to be also good if you're young, you know, you have like the Nina Dobrevs of the world in there too. So the tone was almost done in the casting. Guys like Adam and Thomas I was friends with already. I'd done short films with them. And so for them, I just knew that they would improvise a ton. And the idea for that first half to be very funny, so it would disarm you, so the end could be really, you know, soulful. I just knew that, you know, as good at jokes as we would all write, those guys would take it off the page and go for it. And they love the idea. Thomas is a horror junkie, and Adam is like perfect to be, you know, that meathead idiot with some self-awareness, you know. But that was the idea, to give them all moments of revelation, like Gay Dads. That whole moment was him. So yeah, there was you know, we had the script was very funny. There were a million alts for jokes that we had written in, you know, before, and then those, you know, Alia also, like there was a tremendous amount of improv. So it felt kind of like it had some vitality in it.
And I mean, speaking of tone, you know, there are moments that are full-on slasher moments. Was there any push to make those more rated R, or has it always kind of been the plan to make it PG-13 to not undercut the emotional beats?
Yeah, it was written as R, and it was going to be bloodier and more disgusting, and you know, I mean, I loved those movies, and when I was 13 and 14, I wanted to be a makeup effects person, and I wrote away to Dick Smith and had a correspondence, and I had the Rick Baker books, and I was really into that stuff, and I was doing latex and fake, you know, I was doing all and fake noses in my closet, and so that's what I was like when I was a kid, and that I would make like little short films where I would be, you know, I would have all that stuff going on, blood tubes and things. For a history assignment once, I made the death of Caesar, you know, the stabbing of Caesar, but with blood tubes that sprayed blood all over everyone.
Of course.
In the school, like on their clothes. Anyways. So yeah, it was supposed to be R, and it was supposed to, you know, be dead alive in its disgustingness, but in a way that was like part of the fun of the movie. You know, it wasn't going to be like Saw, you know, like gruesome. It was going to be bloody, but like fun in that Peter Jackson way. But yeah, the R made it unfinanceable. That was what we did find a place that was like, we'll give you the money, we believe in your vision, but you got to make it PG-13, and it was disappointing, but the more that we lived with that idea, and the more that the cast came together, and the more that we sort of sat in our own conversations about, the people in our lives that we had lost, the more it actually became fully the right thing, truly. And I almost am sure that even if we shot the R version, when we edited it, we would have ended up diminishing so much of that stuff that is such a turnoff to most people. So it's hard to make a movie about the reverbs of loss and take it seriously. Like, you want to feel when people die in this movie. That was one of the subversive things. In horror movies, the bigger the blood count, the death count, the more fun it is. We wanted to shove real people in that idea. And so you really felt the loss. And it's kind of hard to feel that when the movie is taking so much pleasure in dismembering people. So in clever ways, like we had disgusting scenes. Tina, who gets stuck in the bear trap, her breasts were going to get sliced off and fly through the air like sauce. It was going to be raunchy and bad. But I'm sure that would have actually broken the tone. In a way. And it also, I think, would have been a real turnoff to a lot of women, if it was filled with nudity and all of those things, which is what those movies did. But something about, I think, not having it makes it feel a little bit more mature, or certainly like it's leaning towards the emotional more than it is the parody or something. And so I think that would have been the right choice later on. It just happened early. We had to get used to it. Movies that we were comping it to were things like Pleasantville, or Purple Rose of Cairo, or Last Act. Those were the movies, or even Back to the Future. Those were the ones that we were looking towards. Obviously, the world of it was going to have that Evil Dead quality, and Nightmare on Elm Street are movies that we love. But yeah, it was, Burning. But we were thinking of Pleasantville. How do you use the 1950s, sitcom mentality to tell a bigger story? That's Pleasantville, for instance. And what was really wonderful was, you're right, the horror community in particular, of which I was a part, for most of my life, really wrapped their arms around a movie that is pretty innocent in terms of its violence and gore, which you wouldn't think is true. But it shows the world at large that the horror community is not a bunch of bloodlusty perverts. Do you know what I mean? They just want good stories and cool characters and interesting movies. And so
we feel too.
Of course. And which is why I think the movie is, so welcomed and beloved in the community in a way, because it doesn't have those elements, but it is a love letter to the genre, obviously, and it plays with the rules of the genre. But, it tells a story about people whose livelihood is horror movies. I mean, Malin Ackerman plays, an actress from those. She plays an actress from those movies that you meet at the conventions, and so, that's a beautiful part of this, is how it's been welcomed into the community afterwards, even though it's a little bit, softer than you'd expect.
And I've and kind of touching back on Final Girls, there's so many fun nods in there. Obviously, you named the character Nancy. That's got to be an Elm Street nod, right? What other sort of horror nods or influences did you inject in there? Were the characters directly inspired by particular horror characters, or were they just kind of a mashup of several of them at once?
The whole thing is a big mashup, but Max having the kind of sexually ambiguous name is obviously a big horror trope. And what are other good ones? I mean, the way that Divine is dressed in that sort of crop top is Johnny Depp in Nightmare. But visually, there is tons of stuff. I mean, the music's got a little bit of Carpenter, and some of the crazy fluorescent lighting is super Argento. And so even pulling from other horror filmmakers was a huge part of it. There's a ton of Burning in there, obviously, for some of the summer camp references, and
sure.
Friday the 13th, the Chi Mama stuff. It was like that. It was trying to be a big mashup of those things, so it felt like it was like that the world was built from the textures of those movies, as opposed to it sometimes being like direct references, because that always goes really more towards just a full parody, you know? Like, you know that movie? We know it too. And like, that's the end of it. As opposed to it becoming the texture of the whole thing. Sam Raimi, obviously, some of the twisty camera stuff.
Definitely.
And like, so those things are all just like flavors of other things without being direct.
One of my favorite shots in the film is the flashback sequence. It's one of the most creative ways to go back in time to tell this guy's story. How did that come about, and how did you design that? That's beautiful.
Well, let's see if the idea translated, because what that is supposed to be, it was almost impossible to verbalize, but you know that effect in movies of that era, really like late 70s, early 80s, of like that watery dissolve, you know? That was, you know, you saw it on TV a lot, and you see it in a couple of these horror movies, and you know, and certainly in Friday the 13th, there's flashback explanations. But we were like, okay, so this movie is going to take cinematic tropes like subtitles, right, and flashbacks and credits, and kind of make them feel like they're real objects and elements in the world. One of my most successful one, I think, is at the end when dawn is coming and they've reached the end of the movie and the credits roll in the sky, and it's weirdly beautiful, but so strange, but funny, and meta, but anyways. So we were like, well, how do we do that with a flashback? So what if they got caught in that watery dissolve? What would that look like in a room? Like, what would that look like if that was happening around you? And so the idea of like the world was melting like gelatin stalactites or something, that was the idea. And then they would all sort of melt together and become that, you know, wobbly, watery thing. So that's what that's supposed to be. And then they get sort of blasted into a black and white flashback, you know, from like the 50s. And even then they would notice that it's black and white. So that was part of the fun of it, was literally putting what an audience at home watching a movie sees into the mouths of people that are inside the movie, you know?
And were you making use of like color symbolism at all? I noticed there's a lot of red and black throughout the film, especially at the end with the red lightning. Was there a particular meaning behind that?
Purple was the big one we had talked about. There was a book of different emotional states and meanings of color that Ellie, the DP, and I we worked really hand in hand. I mean, we were inseparable, and it was beautiful, creative relationship. He's doing so good now. He shoots like every TV show. Yeah, purple was going to be a big one for us, like impending death and loss and grief, and it's also such a beautiful color and electric, so poppy, and you don't really associate purple with the horror genre, so it felt like that would be a good way for us to push the movie so it felt and looked a little bit differently. So, you know, when Malin shows up in the van in the beginning, the curtain behind her is purple, and she opens it up, and the purple light cascades all over her daughter, and the sky is all purple at the end. The lightning is red, but the sky is really purple, and that smoke behind her and all this. So that was a really intentional thing, was whenever Mom was around, or this feeling of nostalgia and impending loss, that would be a big part of it. The black and red less so, but we were trying to stay in we love the color, we love the black, red, yellow, that felt like a really strong palette, you know? We knew we were stuck outside, you know, the skies are gonna be blue or white, the trees and grass are gonna be green, and there's not a lot of control, because it's a mostly outdoors movie. But we thought that if anything else that we added to the world could be really controlled. So we built that main cabin. That was fully built, and built in about 15 days. Oh, wow. Built quickly, and so much of the movie takes place in and around that cabin. We needed the movie to have a little bit of geography. So that main cabin was built to code from scratch. Is the only way that they would let us do it, because it could stay up. And we shot this movie at a summer camp for girls in Louisiana. So we were literally all at camp making this movie, and everyone was like 30 and under. So it did have that, and I was head counselor, so it did have that very fun feeling. And being in the South was really exciting. But we painted that cabin to be like that. We decorated the inside very meticulously. But then all the other cabins that they had on their campus, we did make black and red. And then the canoes and the Pendleton sheets and the yellow outfits. That was attempting to create a persistence of vision, a sense of color control in there, knowing how little you would have in terms of what you could light and stuff in the middle of the day. The way that we did the score for Final Girls was insane, and not probably the best way to do it. But creatively, it was the best way to do it. There's a guy named Greg Jenkins. He goes by Greg Tronick, and he's a genius. And he's another guy. A lot of the short films I was doing right before Final Girls, all those people came with me into Final Girls, and so Greg was doing all the shorts. And he was like a one-man band who was like a synth major in college and was doing a lot of music for commercials and movies. But it would be so fun because it was almost like I made the music with him. We'd sit in a room together and I would hum things, or I would hear him mess around with things, and I'd be like, that's good, follow that. And he would go. So I would almost hear him thinking out loud or composing out loud, and then I could help direct him as he was going, or be inspired by what he was writing. And so it wouldn't be this thing of he'd be alone, come up with something, notes, then he'd go alone, work with something, notes. It was together, and it was beautiful. With Final Girls, it was insane because he wasn't writing before we shot, and he wasn't writing while we shot. And the way that we edited that movie is also part of what might feel very alive about that movie, because the editing process was berserk. We were cutting it. We had let go of our first editor, who was having a hard time keeping up with the amount of footage that I was shooting. This is a person who was more used to kind of just like smaller indie movies, and I was taking a small indie budget and trying to make a very ambitious, innovative, special movie. So there was just a ton of footage every day, like 55 or 60 setups a day. Like, how are you doing that? Like Robert Rodriguez style, you know what I mean? It's like boom, 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 never stopping to shoot. Very exciting feeling on set. But they couldn't keep up. And it also needed like a lot of like tech finesse, like you had to speed ramp shots and be time warping things to get jokes to work better. Anyway, so we let this person go and hired another person named Debbie Berman, who was a genius and a lifesaver, who ended up editing Black Panther, a few years later. So Debbie and I and Greg, it was just the three of us and an assistant editor in New York editing, and all the producers in the studio, everyone was in Los Angeles, and no one knew what we were doing. And when you're making a movie, you get 10 weeks without any interruptions to edit before you present it. That's the rules, even though people don't follow them. But that was what we were doing. But generally, on day one of editing, you have had an editor assembling the movie as you've been shooting. So you have something to sit there and look at. You have things organized and takes broken down. But we didn't have that. Our first editor had fallen so far behind that the movie was barely assembled and almost nothing was organized. So we essentially started on day one about 7 weeks behind. And so we were starting from scratch on day one. So, and even though I would explain this to everyone, I'd be like, we're 7 weeks behind, there's no way we're gonna be done with this in 10 weeks to show it to you. They said, don't care, or they didn't hear, or they didn't care. Something that was not being processed by them. So we were going as fast as we could. So we were cutting 6-day weeks, sometimes 7, 15 hours a day in New York, in the summer. And we would cut, and there was no time to be pulling temp music. Often what happens is you have a music editor who, just slams in music from other movies under your scenes, and then later the composer's gonna come and write the music, which is not even a very good process, because you fall in love with the wrong music. On this project, which is very rare, but I loved it, we would go through all the footage together, and we would begin to cut a scene. And we would get something, general out. And we were cutting in order. So first scene, okay, we got that. We got an idea. Then we send it over to Greg's office down the hall. Then I'd go sit with Greg, and we'd write the music for that one scene. Then I'd run back, and we'd start editing scene 2. And then we'd send that to Greg, and then I'd go work on the music. The movie was being built scene by scene and scored scene by scene in a rush until finally we had like 3/4 of a movie, and we could sit back and watch it and be like, fuck, this is crazy. This is all, it's like not a movie, it's just like a bunch of really cool singular scenes. Okay, let's like stretch it out now. Let's let things breathe a little bit, and the music is too busy, or maybe we don't need music here. And that's how we were making it. Then, I'm almost done. Then, and on like week 9, I called them and I was like, yeah, guys, we got about 70 minutes of the movie, we got 20 minutes left. So we're gonna need another 3 weeks. But isn't that amazing? We got ahead of this by 4 weeks. They go, show us the movie in 7 days. I go, no, we can't, there's no way. They're like, you have to. So we started going and going and going. And I remember that this is the good part of the story, is that on the final Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, we had gotten up to the goodbye moment, the Betty Davis eyes in the church. That's the dance and the death and the action scene. That's where we were on the last 3 days. And we pulled 2 consecutive all-nighters. This is including the stuff being scored, you know, all of it. The last 72 hours, we were up for 3 fucking days and nervous, you know, because they were being, you know, really kind of jerks to us, and there was this time crunch, and what are they going to say are they going to hate it, or are we going to lose our jobs? And so we stayed up for this long weekend and cut those scenes in a hysterical emotional state. And as we cut that goodbye scene, we ourselves were crying because we were saying goodbye to the movie, and, you know, tensions were high and all this. And then we turned in the movie and all this, we got notes and all, we did, you know, whatever. Everyone started fighting. But the end of that movie did barely changed at all from that night through until the movie that you see. The way that movie ends, I think, is so good. And I just remember sitting in that fucking bunker with Debbie and Greg, scoring the music and da-da-da-da-da, and doing the action. And it's amazing that it stayed like 100% the same all the way to the end of all the way to the finished product. That was like, it was like we were skinned and our hearts were just making it. And you can feel it, or I can feel it when I watch it. Anyways, that's why the end of that movie feels that way in certain ways.
And you had mentioned Robert Rodriguez when you were talking about that. What are some of your creative influences? Is he one?
When you're like 12 to 16, maybe you would say that's maybe the first most. That's when you find filmmakers and you really adopt their language, or you're trying to speak your language by using the dialects of other people, you know. And so yeah, when I was that age, I was absolutely obsessed with Rodriguez, and I read that book over and over, and I loved it because it was so transparent. That was what was exciting, is that he was just so transparent about process, and that was exciting. And I just loved. I remember just, you know, getting a bootleg of El Mariachi and being like, this is fucking sick, you know. And then Desperado, oh my god, and Dusk Till Dawn, and just the camera technique was amazing. The stories were great, and again, you could just feel the passion. I remember being particularly enamored, because I so badly wanted to be a director, by any film where you could see a director directing. Meaning you could see a style, you could see a voice, you could see an expression of a person. Not, you know, so Ghostbusters is great, I loved it, but really, Hudsucker Proxy blew my fucking mind, you know? Those kinds of experiences. And on the ceiling of my room, I put a bunch of posters, and it was Coen Brothers movies and Rodriguez movies and, you know, Boogie Nights, but it was also like Oliver Stone movies and Basquiat, like Julian Schnabel movies, and I fucking loved, like, you know, that movie Lovers on a Bridge, that like Leo Caro movie, or like Mauvais Sang. I remember like catching that and being like, who the fuck, what the hell? And so I also love Michael Bay movies. I remember just like watching, you know, seeing The Rock and being like, God, what a fucking visual technique, and Fincher movies and Hitchcock movies. And I was particularly just really excited when you could see a, you know, the movies where you see a frame of the film and you're like, I know who made that, you know? Definitely. And also music videos, because, you know, in high school and college, you know, music videos were a really tremendous art form, and directors were being plucked out of that into movies. And so I loved just coming home after school and watching a ton of music videos and knowing who made what, and again, just studying and studying. I got like David Fincher's Reel somehow and watched it frame by frame and just tried to understand how they were, Spike Jonze and Linklater, and just really trying to learn dialects, you know. Just amazing. I still go back and look. Mike Mills was doing videos, and it was, you know, yeah, just very inspiring. And I still do it, you know. I still try to fill my brain with new things I'd never seen, you know, like Genet, like. But particularly being like 14, 15, having a video camera on my hand all the time and seeing those movies and just trying to replicate, you know, Spike Lee and Scorsese and different New York filmmakers. Sidney Lumet, my father would be like, well, you gotta see Failsafe. And I'd be like, what's that, you know? I'm 15 years old watching Failsafe. I'm like, wow, this is, who's John? Wow. We're like, who's John Frankenheimer? Wait, that guy's movies feel more alive than the shit that I saw last night. Let's watch all of those. And anyways, I would, you know, I was like any of those. I was like any 14-year-old that was just enamored and obsessed with movies.
We're close to wrapping up, but I did want to ask you about your next film, A Silent Retreat, I believe.
You know, the more you make things, the more you understand who you are as a, you know, as a filmmaker or creative person. Now I've done it 4 times. You know, I make a bigger one, and then I have a reaction to that experience and make a tiny one. And then I have Final Girls as a tiny one. And then I have a reaction to that experience and I go make a big one. And then I make a little one again. And and so Retreat is a little one, but it's the first one that I wrote. You know, I wrote it with my best friend. It is the most personal. It is similar to the other work in terms of it being, you know, it's quite funny, and then it becomes quite emotional. But it's really close to me, and it's about 4 idiots that go on a silent meditation retreat. Do you guys know what those are?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah,
I do. Yeah, I've never been on one, but I've heard about it.
Yeah. Most people have never been on them, but are at least curious. I have been on them. I have been on them. You know, that's a part of my life. You know, the retreats and meditating, and that was part of the coming out of the grief of my father. You know, some of the processing that was making Final Girls, and also finding, you know, different things like meditation, and so that all really helped and informs my stuff. So James, if you think that, you know, romantic has more of soul or a little more depth than you would expect from a movie like that, it's probably because I spent the better part of that decade trying to do that to myself, you know, like get more depth as a person. And Retreat continues that trend. And so it's about 3 idiots that go on a silent meditation retreat for a weekend, and it becomes a silent film, like a Buster Keaton or a Charlie Chaplin movie. And you follow 4 different characters over 3 days, go berserk. And there's a lot of clowning and physical comedy and slapstick as they really come apart. They lose their minds, and then they find themselves again at the end. And small little movie, we shot it in 21 days, which is really so short in upstate New York. And I'm almost done with it. And that's what that movie is. Probably the most translucent of all of the movies in terms of getting close to like who I am. You know, like you see these things in all the other movies. You see slapstick, and you see Middleditch being funny, and you see, you know, they're physical, or you see a musical number. You know, there's a lot of physical stuff, and then there's a lot of feeling. You know, this is less parody and stuff, although we certainly are playing in the sandbox of silent films. There's barely any dialogue in this movie, and characters there's embodied storytelling. There's teachers giving long monologues about meditation and rules, and Isabella Rossellini's in the movie, and so, but that's what I've been working on for the last maybe eight months or so. And that's what I'm working on during quarantine. I'm finishing that movie.
There'll be food and drink and ghosts, and perhaps even a few murders. You're all invited.
The scariest thing that ever happened to me was in in college. I was dating a woman who from Charlottesville, Virginia, and I lived in New York, and we were driving back and forth to see each other a lot this summer. And I went on vacation with her family to North Carolina, the Outer Banks. And it was a tumultuous relationship. We're still friends now. This was a long time ago. But she was very wanting to take ecstasy and with me on this family vacation. And she put it upon me to find the ecstasy, and I did not know how to find it because I was not a person who was cool. And I asked a bunch of kids in high school, and I ended up somehow finding some, and went down to North Carolina with her and her family. And one night, she and I had a terrible fight, a horrible fight on vacation, and then barely made up. And she was like, well, should we do the ecstasy now or what? And I was like, okay. I was nervous person, and did not handle drugs gracefully, let's say. So we both took the ecstasy. She had two older brothers. We took the ecstasy, and we walked down the hallway to her brother's room, and they were just like drinking beers and smoking joints. And we told them that we had taken the drugs, and I think to fuck with us, they were like, oh, you know what makes X so much better is getting also drunk and really high. And we were like, oh, well, we want it to be really good. So we just drank like 2 beers and smoked some pot. And this is too much for a person with my constitution. And so we went back to our room and then started like making out or something. And then without even my consciousness knowing what was happening, my whole body filled with fear ran to the bathroom and tried to start making itself throw up. But she was like a normal person and just started having a great ecstasy trip and giggling and laughing and come out of the bathroom, let's hang out. But I was in there pacing around back and forth, sweating, looking at myself in the mirror, being like, my mother's gonna fucking kill me if she finds me dead from a drug overdose in North Carolina. And I couldn't throw up, and I was just having a very bad trip. And I finally breathed deeply enough or had some alone time and came out of the bathroom, and the only way that I could keep myself grounded and not like having a panic attack was to go out onto the balcony of this hotel and chain smoke cigarettes. I smoked a pack of cigarettes as the sun came up and just talked, like monologued to her. And I remember it so vividly. I was just filled with love, and I was like, oh, you're the most beautiful woman I've ever met, and I can't wait to spend my life with you, and oh, wasn't it fun when this, and you're such a special that, and our relationship is so incredible. And I just would not shut the fuck up, and just like sucking in American Spirit yellows like crazy for hours. And that was the night. Okay. The scariest thing that ever happened to me was the next morning at breakfast when we woke up, hungover but okay, survived it, and sat down with her parents and her brothers, who were very intimidating. Her father was a pretty, big Republican motorcycle guy, rich. And we had breakfast, and he goes, how was your night? And I go, no, it was okay. And he goes, your room is right below our room.
Oh, no.
Turns out I kept them awake all night long with my proclamations of love. And that is the scariest thing that ever happened to me.
Todd, I want to thank you so much for being with us here at Sound Scary. Personally, it's always good to see another Emerson alum killing it out there. We love your work.
Thank you. It's we very much love that this movie has an afterlife and a bunch of passionate lunatics, the actors and the crew and all of us. We really did put everything into the making it, and it's just so nice to see it have this afterlife. So thanks.